There is a moment most of us know well. You don't have to describe it. You don't have to name it out loud, but you know at that moment when everything you worked for collapses, when the door you knocked on swings shut, when the relationship you poured yourself into crumbles, when the business idea, the promotion, the dream, the thing you told yourself this time, it's going to work, doesn't. And in that moment, something happens inside you. It's not just disappointment. It's deeper than that. It's the quiet, creeping voice that says, maybe I'm just not meant for this. Maybe people like me don't get to succeed. Maybe I should stop trying. We live in a world that celebrates arrival. We see the trophy, the title, the finished product. We see the person standing on the stage, shaking hands, cutting the ribbon. What we rarely see, what history rarely shows us, is the wreckage that came before. The years of crawling through the dark, the humiliation, the bankruptcy, the grief, the failure that broke something inside a person and forced them to decide whether or not to rebuild. Most people, when they fail once, adjust their dreams downward. They protect themselves. They stop aiming at the thing that mattered and start aiming at something safer, something they can't be as hurt by losing. And over time, the life they live becomes smaller than the life they were meant for. But there are others. There are people who fail not once, not twice, but relentlessly, and who refuse to let the failures write the final sentence of their story. These are not superhuman people. They are not without fear, without doubt, without nights of despair. They are simply people who made a different decision when they were flat on their backs. One of those people was a man born in a one-room log cabin in Kentucky in 1809, a man with no formal education, no wealth, no connections, no advantages of any kind, a man who would lose more times than most people are ever brave enough to try. His name was Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was born into poverty so complete, it is almost incomprehensible today. His family lived in a dirt floor cabin. He had in total less than 1 year of formal schooling, and that year was fragmented, spread across a few months here and there as a child. He taught himself to read by firelight. He borrowed books and walked miles to return them. He had no mentor, no university, no library, no teacher to guide him. His mother, Nancy Lincoln, died when he was 9 years old. His father remarried, and while his stepmother, Sarah Bush Johnston, was kind to him, the young Lincoln grew up understanding that loss was simply part of life's architecture. He worked physically brutal jobs, splitting fence rails, running a mill, working as a store clerk. He was tall, awkward, self-conscious about his appearance. He had almost nothing. And yet, something burned inside him. An ambition, yes, but more than ambition, a conviction that he had something to contribute to the world. At 23, Lincoln ran for the Illinois state legislature. He lost. That same year, he started a small business. It failed. He spent years paying off the debts so heavy people in his town mockingly called them the national debt. At 26, he suffered a severe nervous breakdown after the death of his close friend and early love, Anne Rutledge. He was so distraught that his friends hid sharp objects from him, fearing what he might do to himself. At 29, he was rejected from the woman he was courting, Mary Owens, who turned down his proposal. At 34, he ran for Congress. He lost. At 34, he ran again. He won and served 1 term, only to be seen as ineffective and largely forgotten. At 45, he ran for the United States Senate. He lost. At 47, he ran for vice president. He lost. At 49, he ran for Senate again. He lost. That is a man who was told by voters, by life, by circumstance, no, over and over and over again. Most of us would have stopped after the second or third rejection. We would have found a way to rationalize it. The system is rigged. I'm not cut out for politics. My time has passed. Lincoln never said any of that. In 1858, after losing yet another Senate race, one of the most famous and closely watched debates in American political history, the Lincoln-Douglas debates, he turned to a friend and said something extraordinary. I feel like the boy who stubbed his toe. I am too big to cry, and too badly hurt to laugh. That is not the statement of a man in denial. It is the statement of a man who felt every bit of the pain and chose to stay anyway. Lincoln understood something that took him decades to articulate: that defeat is not the opposite of success. It is the path to it. Every loss taught him something he could not have learned from victory. Every rejection sharpened his thinking, deepened his empathy, and forged in him a quality that would one day make him one of the greatest leaders in human history: resilience. So what did Lincoln actually do when he failed? What were the rules he lived by? Because this is not just a story about a remarkable man, it is a manual for how to survive your own defeats. Principle 1. He never defined himself by his failures. Lincoln did not say, "I am a failed businessman, a failed politician, a failed husband." He saw each failure as a chapter, not the whole book. He had what psychologists today call a growth mindset. 2 centuries before the term was coined, the belief that abilities are developed through effort, not fixed at birth. He once said, "My great concern is not whether you have failed, but whether you are content with your failure." This is the first question you must ask yourself. Not did I fail, but am I content with it? Have I made peace with something I should still be fighting for? Principle 2. He used suffering to build empathy, not bitterness. Something remarkable happened to Lincoln through all those years of loss. He didn't become cynical. He didn't become cold. He became more human. Because he had known poverty, he understood the poor. Because he had known grief, he understood the grieving. Because he had failed in business, he understood the man who couldn't pay his debts. His suffering became not a wall between him and the world, but a bridge. When Lincoln finally became president in 1861 at the age of 52, after decades of failure, he was leading a nation tearing itself apart. And the way he led it was not with arrogance or revenge, but with extraordinary compassion. His second inaugural address, considered one of the greatest speeches in history, contained words that could only come from a man who had suffered deeply himself. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in. No malice, no bitterness. Even after 4 years of the bloodiest war in American history, he chose charity. Your pain does not have to make you hard. It can make you human. Principle 3. He was honest about his struggles, and he kept going anyway. Lincoln did not pretend to be unaffected by his failures. He suffered from what he himself called the hypos, what we would today recognize as depression. He wrote to a friend at his lowest point, "I am now the most miserable man living. If what I feel were equally distributed to the whole human family, there would not be one cheerful face on earth." This is important, because so much of what we are told about successful people leaves out their darkness. We are led to believe that the great ones never doubted themselves, that confidence was their natural state, that they marched forward with certainty while the rest of us trembled. Lincoln's life tells a different story. He was terrified. He was depressed. He doubted himself profoundly. And he kept going anyway. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the decision that something else matters more than the fear. Principle 4. He had a purpose bigger than himself. This may be the most important principle of all. Lincoln did not persevere simply because he wanted to be president. He persevered because he believed in something deeply, fiercely, at the level of his bones. He believed that a nation conceived in liberty could not survive half slave and half free. He believed that every human being was created equal. He believed that the American experiment was worth saving, worth fighting for, worth dying for. When you are fighting only for yourself, for your ego, for your status, for your comfort, the defeats will eventually outweigh the desire. But when you are fighting for something beyond yourself, a different arithmetic applies. He said it plainly, "I am a slow walker, but I never walk back." Slow, steady, forward, always forward. Not because the road was easy, but because the destination mattered. Principle 5. He learned from everyone, including his enemies. Lincoln famously filled his cabinet with his political rivals, men who had run against him, men who thought they were more qualified, men who openly mocked him. His Secretary of State, William Seward, initially wrote to his wife that Lincoln was a well-meaning, honest man, but the times require something more. Seward thought Lincoln a fool. Lincoln appointed him anyway, and by the end of Lincoln's presidency, Seward wept openly at his deathbed, calling him the greatest man he had ever known. Lincoln refused to surround himself with people who would only tell him what he wanted to hear. He wanted the best minds in the room, even if those minds belonged to people who didn't believe in him, because he understood that ego is a luxury a leader cannot afford. Learning matters more than looking good. In November 1860, after all those years of failure, after bankruptcy and grief and rejection and ridicule, Abraham Lincoln was elected the 16th President of the United States. He had not become president despite his failures. He had become president because of what those failures had built inside him: patience, empathy, humility, resilience, and an unshakable belief in something larger than himself. He led the nation through its greatest crisis. He preserved the Union. He signed the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing 4 million enslaved people. He is consistently ranked by historians as the greatest president in American history. He was 56 years old when he was assassinated at Ford's Theater in 1865. He had been on this earth only 56 years, and look what he built from the wreckage of a life that seemed to offer him nothing. He was not born into greatness. He climbed into it, one failure at a time. Now let me speak directly to you. You are listening to this because something in your life has not gone the way you planned. Maybe you failed at something recently. Maybe you failed a long time ago and the wound is still tender. Maybe you are standing at the edge of trying again and the fear is paralyzing you. I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear it clearly. Your defeats are not disqualifications. They are credentials. Every time you tried and failed, you did something that most people never had the courage to do. You stepped forward. You raised your hand. You dared to want something. That is not weakness, that is the raw material of character. Lincoln failed to get into the Senate. Twice. He became president. Lincoln's business collapsed. It made him understand the common man. Lincoln lost the people he loved most. It made him fight to preserve what remained. Nothing was wasted. Not one loss, not one rejection, not one sleepless night. The question is, never have you failed. The question is, what will you do next? You do not need to be extraordinary to begin again. You do not need certainty. You do not need the approval of everyone around you. You do not need to have it all figured out. You need to take one step. Just one. Lincoln said, "The best way to predict the future is to create it." So what future are you going to create? Not the future that your past failures seem to be pointing toward. Not the future that fear is designing for you. The future that the truest, most determined version of you has always known is possible. It is not too late. It was not too late for a man with no education, no money, no connections, who suffered depression and bankruptcy and public humiliation and personal grief, and who still became the most celebrated leader his nation ever produced. It is not too late for you. Stand up, brush off the dust, carry what you've learned from the fall, and walk forward. Slowly, if you must, imperfectly, if you must, with doubt still in your chest, if you must. But walk. I am a slow walker, but I never walk back. Neither should you.